Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to a new event organized by the Observatorio de la Lengua Española y las Culturas Hispánicas en los Estados Unidos, which, as most of you know, is a research center and a joint project between Harvard University and the Instituto Cervantes. It gives us great pleasure to host this particular event, with which we're contributing to Harvard's Worldwide Week once again, and which will allow us to get first-hand knowledge of the creative process and the social and personal concerns and experiences of a really inspiring artist whose exciting work touches on topics which are highly relevant to the Observatorio's aims. And to discuss Arleene Correa Valencia's artistic and personal experiences with the artist herself, we are very fortunate to have the chair of Harvard's Committee on Ethnicity, Migration and Rights, Raquel Vega-Durán, who heads this committee focusing precisely on those social aspects which feature so prominently in Arlene's work. Both Jana Sorensen, the director of the Observatorio, who I can see here, who's with us today, and myself are deeply grateful to Arleene Correa Valencia for accepting our invitation to share her work and her thoughts and experiences with the Observatorio's friends, and also to Raquel Vega-Durán for accepting our invitation to conduct this event. Let me then first introduce Raquel, who will then introduce Arleene Correa Valencia, and then they will hold a conversation for the first part of this session about Arlene's work and experiences, after which you will all be invited to engage in the conversation either through the chat in writing or orally asking the questions yourselves in person. So I'll introduce Raquel. Raquel Vega-Durán is senior lecturer in Romance, Languages and Literatures at Harvard University, and is an expert, and among other fields, in migration and border studies, transatlantic history and literature, Mediterranean crossings, gender studies, narratives of identity, memory, forgetting, and exile, and intersections between art and literature. Indeed, in her latest book, titled Immigrant Dreams, Immigrant Borders, Migrants, Transnational Encounters, and Identity in Spain, Raquel Vega-Durán introduces the reader to a wide range of recent films, journals, novels, photography, paintings, and music to reconsider the complexity of contemporary Spanish identity through its varied encounters and migrants. And she's told me she's now working on another fascinating project, a book which will be titled Vanishing Europe, Abandoned Villages and the Repopulation of Europe in the 21st Century, in which she studies the depopulation and the repopulation of various European countries. So I hope you will agree that she was the ideal person to conduct this conversation with Arlene. And so thank you so much, Raquel. You have the floor now.
So thank you very much, Marta, for the really nice introduction. And it is with great pleasure and to introduce painter, sculptor, and creator Arleene Correa Valencia. She was born in Mexico, and her family migrated to the United States when she was young, establishing themselves in Napa Valley, known today as like California's wine country. Growing up in Napa as an undocumented immigrant, where immigrants have played an essential role in its economy, since they are more than half of the, I think it's 55,000 people that work in this industry, Arlene has been a first-hand witness of the extreme wealth disparity of this wine region. Arlene has seen like that hard labor, like that, the grape pickers, and how it coexists with the expensive wine tasting trips. She's a recipient of DACA, and this status has influenced many of her works. She's an artist who inhabits this in-between space, a complex, rich, and paradoxical landscape that has informed and inspired her art. Through painting, sculpture, and repurposed objects, her works transmit an extremely rich and striking narrative of migration, visibility and invisibility, hardship, belonging, and resilience. Her work manages to make visible the invisible and to acknowledge a long history of abuse, confinement, and silence. But it also celebrates the resilience, courage, and pride of her community, inviting the audience to join her fight to fracture the silence and oblivion imposed on immigrants. While her art pieces deal with many similar topics, and some of them share similar titles, such as Invisibles and Invisibles in the Darkness, or In Times of Crisis 2017 and In Times of Crisis 2020, all of them are very unique. And I would like to note that the titles of the series are both in English and in Spanish, so you can have Invisibles and Invisible, or In Times of Crisis and En Tiempos de Crisis, underlining once more the complex in-betweenness, if I can say that, and multiplicity of her work. Arlene's work is both personal and universal, and it is fascinating to experience the almost vivid dialogue that it established between the audience and the protagonists of her pieces. Emigrating from Arteaga, Michoacán, Mexico to Napa, California, has affected her socio-political position in the United States, and in particular in her art practice. In her painting, sculptures, murals, and artworks made out of found objects, Arlene establishes a dialogue between her political status and those who experience similar confinements. Her several series challenge the audience, and we cannot but be active participants of her narrative. For example, in her series 1997, and I'm gonna try to share here, just bear with me to see if I can share my screen. Can you see my screen? Okay, great. So in the series 1997, we are transported back in time 24 years, becoming witnesses of her migration to the United States through subtle silhouettes of her family's journey. In Viajes, on the right, Arlene compiles a series of found objects, trying to move her audience to think about what do we take and where do we go when we're forced to move. In Mujeres, Women, and in Invisibles and Invisibles in the Darkness, and I can show just some examples of that. Arlene is showing us something really incredible, because she conceals the identity of the protagonist by painting over them. And it's incredible how by not showing something, she makes it extra visible. And along these lines of promoting visibility, we find En Tiempos de Crisis 2017, In Times of Crisis 2017, and In Times of Crisis 2020. In 2017, wildfires spread through the Napa Valley, threatening the vineyards and the wineries. While news reporters rushed to cover the burning properties and the evacuation of residents in the area, Arlene rushed to the fields. There, she found immigrant workers working tirelessly. Winemakers were under a huge amount of pressure, of course, not to save the grapes from both the fire and the smoke damage. And farm workers just did not have the luxury to leave, even though it was very unsafe to stay and breathe the air. In Times of Crisis 2017, documents this invisible reality. And in her words, and I quote, "The moon was out, it was red-orange, highlighted by the fires. It was something out of a movie. It was beautiful. But underneath all that, there were people, and they were not safe. They were hustling up and down these long stretches of vineyard, just running to save the grape." In her series of portraits of field workers, and here you have an example, she successfully inserts the often invisible brown faces into white-walled spaces, showing, as she has pointed out, the resilience and extreme work ethic of my Latino community. With her work, Arlene unravels the complexity of human migratory experiences due to political decisions that control how people can move around the world. Visibility, voice, and representation are key in her work. And a clear example of that is the collective mural Somos Visibles and her collaboration with artist Ana Teresa Fernandez in Come to Your Census, Who Counts in America, a citywide campaign where they use art to inspire all communities to take part in the 2020 census as an opportunity for agency, representation, belonging, and resistance. Arlene and Ana collaborated with Somos Visibles, We Are Not Invisible, printing that slogan on high visibility gear present throughout many labor industries, thus denouncing the invisibility of those undocumented in the United States. So I could talk for hours about her extraordinary work, but I think we all would rather hear from her. So please join me in welcoming artist Arlene Correa Valencia.
Hi, it's so nice to be here. And thank you, Raquel, for that beautiful introduction. I feel like you explain my work so much better than I can a lot of the times. It's a difficult conversation when it gets so personal sometimes, you know. And well, first of all, I just want to say thank you to everyone for inviting me here, for everyone who showed up, for listening. You guys really have no idea how much this means to me. As Raquel mentioned, I am an immigrant from Mexico. I came to the US when I was 3 years old, and I'll tell you a little bit more about my story as this conversation develops. But I never in my life imagined that I would be where I am today. I never, as a kid, I always, you know, I knew I wanted to be an artist. I knew that there was something about me that was going to change the world. And I know that's cheesy, you know, but I knew that I was put in the position that I was to find beauty in the hardship and to be able to show that to the world. And I think I have a lot of these conversations with people that constantly say, oh, I wish you had a green card, or I wish I could make life easier for you, or I wish that, you know, this didn't happen to your community. But I wouldn't change it for the world, because I have the best perspective and I get to share that with all of you through my work. You know, it's my family is the inspiration for the work that I make, and everything that happens to me, whether good or bad, is something that we can take from and make art out of. And I think that's what makes art so special, you know, is that we could take our biggest moments of pain or love and share those with one another and find connections. I'm really excited to talk to all of you, to answer any questions that you may have in regards of the work. Sometimes there are things I don't think about when I'm making the work, or that don't come up. So if any of you have any questions at any point, please feel free to ask. Yeah, I think we should just get started.
That sounds great. And in fact, it's really hard to see, like, where do we start? Because there are like so many questions that I want to ask. So I will try to start maybe from the beginning, like, just because it's a unique opportunity to have an artist to talk about their own work, both as a process and as a product. And I would like to start by asking you about your relationship with your work, because one of the main characteristics of your work is that it does not leave the spectator indifferent. It moves you to question and to rethink many of the like preconceived ideas we may have about migration, belonging, representation. So where do you find inspiration, and what kinds of like events moved you to create your pieces? And how is your work part of who you are, and why did you decide to become an artist?
Okay, to answer that, Raquel, I'm gonna have to share my screen. So let me pop on here and share my screen so that I can show you all some pictures. Because I would love to answer all of these questions to the best of my ability. This is my mother, my brother, and I in 1996. It's one of my favorite pictures because I was only 3 years old. My brother was 5 and my mom was pregnant with my little sister. And I think that in order for anyone and all of you to understand my practice and to understand who I am and why I make art, you have to see my family. That has to be visible. It has to be hyper visible. My family is my entire life. They are my entire world. We are extremely close. And every single piece that I create, whether it is a direct representation of my family or not, it is influenced by them and their love for me. This is my father and my sister and I in middle school. Like I said, I grew up in Napa Valley. And so as you can imagine, growing up in an economy that is so rich and beautiful, as an undocumented person of color, can be very difficult and really hard. I want to be so transparent about why I decided to be an artist and how it happened for me. And in order to do that, I have to explain to you that I have a lot of trauma from being undocumented. My family was very fortunate that we did make it to the US in our long journey from our home in Mexico. But coming here is no easy task for any family of 5 or 4 at the time. And with that, there was a lot of hardship, you know, a lot of times that we had to get through situations that were really difficult. And one of those situations that I think I was saved by with art was the lack of communication that there was between my father and I. He is a hardworking man who worked 7 days a week, 3 jobs, came home, would put his feet up and go to sleep so that he can keep working in a few hours. And that's what he had to do to put a roof over our heads, because as many of you know, undocumented people in this country end up in a job that's very labor intensive. And so really early on, probably around this age, I realized that I didn't have a relationship with my father, that there was no communication, that he wouldn't come home and give me a kiss and say, hey, mija, how are you doing? He was so preoccupied with surviving and putting shoes on our feet so that we would be able to have an education better than his own or anyone in my family, that there was no bonding between the two of us. My father grew up in Arteaga, in Michoacán, and he wanted to be an artist his whole life. He wanted to go to art school. He's extremely talented. What I make is nothing compared to what he makes. And so when I was really young, I realized that my father would listen to me and that he would pay attention to me if I was interested in art. And so to be completely transparent, art was a mode of communication. It was a language that I could speak with him, where there was no machismo, there was no lines like, oh, you're not my son. There was nothing. It was just him and I, and we were able to spend time together. And as this young child, I really craved that. I wanted that love from him. I wanted him to look at me and say, mija, I'll hang out with you for a couple hours. And so I decided that art was our language. And if I liked art, he would pay attention to me. And it gave me the opportunity to get to know my father, to get to know my grandparents, who unfortunately I was never able to spend any time with, because they remained in Mexico and then passed away. And because of our immigration status, we were not able to ever be with them, which is still one of my biggest fears. I fear that that'll happen with my own family every single day. And so art really was a way to just get to know my family, to get to know my history. If I painted, my dad would paint next to me. We would listen to Camila, Ricardo Arjona, all these really soft Latinx music and whatever. And it sets the mood for me even today. Right now in the studio, I listen to the exact same music that I did back then. Growing up then in Napa Valley, I realized that I was not like all the other kids. I could not get a license at 16. I could not travel. When my friends came home from their vacations in Puerto Vallarta or whatever, wherever they decided to go, Hawaii, I was always wondering when it was going to be my turn. Later on, I found out that I was indeed undocumented. And I think I always knew that. We always knew that, but it was never a conversation that was transparent. And it was never a conversation that my parents decided to sit us down and say, you can't do this, you can't do that. I think eventually we just picked up the pieces around us and realized that we were not like other people. After high school, my husband went to UCSB and I helped him get there. And it was one of the most painful process to watch him go to college and for me to have to stay back because I didn't have a social, I couldn't get financial aid. There was nothing I could do to go to college. So I am very stubborn and I decided to go to the Napa Valley College. I was there for 4 years and I enrolled in every single art class. And I felt that if I was doing art, I was still finding a piece of myself. I was still getting to know myself just in the same way that I was getting to know my father as a child. And then at one point or another, I decided that I would embrace who I really was and that I would embrace being undocumented. For years and years, I was so ashamed of telling my friends and family members and other people that I was undocumented. It's one of the most shameful things that you can grow up with, because people assume that you are just like them and they suddenly out you, or they make you feel like you are less than if you don't have this piece of paper that proves that you are here legally. But when I embraced that part of myself, doors opened up. I started feeling better about myself. I removed that shame and I was able to speak for myself. And so becoming an artist was this really natural process where I wanted to understand my family. I wanted to understand my culture and my history, and it helped me learn about myself. And in doing that and in creating these portraits of my family and in making this work about my family, I'm allowing other people to learn about themselves or opening the door for them to learn about themselves without the shame. I think a lot about cultural appropriation, and thinking of who gets to tell my story? Why does somebody else get to speak for me? Why does someone else get to tell the world that I have this migrant trauma in this country? Why don't I get to say it, right? And so that really became my foot in the door and saying, I'm going to fully embrace who I am. I'm not going to hold back at any point. And I'm going to take my trauma and find beauty in it, because there's beauty in everything. And by doing that, I'm going to learn to connect to other people. I'm going to work with my community. I'm going to create moments in which other children who, like myself, can see themselves reflected and can see the power that lies in them, regardless of their legal status.
Great. I think that's a great point to start, because you really talk about like that kind of like duality and real complexity, you know, that is your life as a migrant. And it's interesting that even though you're here and you belong here, but at the same time, your identity is still migrating between your origin and the destination. So I think it takes us to your work, no? Because you really can show that in your work. And I would be interested in hearing you talk a little bit about how and why your art draws attention towards those dualities and contradictions, offering a complex narrative to the viewer. No, for example, like a theme that stands out in your work is the peaceful and tense coexistence of the visible and the invisible, and how by not showing something, you make it the main subject in your work. And you talk a little bit about that, no? Say like you didn't want to say that you were like undocumented, but then you said that, no? So that kind of complexity, you can see that in the visibility and invisibility. So this has been part of many of your series, such as like Invisibles or Invisibles in the Darkness, or like the one on women, no? That one in particular.
Yeah.
So what does invisibility mean to you, and how do opposites such as visibility and invisibility, or beauty and pain that you were talking about before, coexist in your work in harmony? Because it's both peaceful and tense at the same time.
Yeah, well, I think I didn't figure that out for a long time, but I was just naturally creating these things that were in tension with each other. Specifically, this series is the mujeres, the women. It creates a lot of tension for myself. I was in grad school and I was constantly being asked, why aren't you painting women? You're painting men, and you're constantly painting men. And that I will be also very honest about. Yes, absolutely. I was 100% only painting men because I love my father. My father is the love of my life. I mean, he's my inspiration in everything that I do. And so, but then I was being confronted with like, where are the women, you know? And I just said to my professor one day, like, stop asking me that. I can't deal with the idea of a woman right now because it's too painful for me. There's trauma that I have not resolved. And I think that's the beauty in art, right? That we are able to take our life experiences and resolve things for ourselves by creating these works. And so this work I made, I think in like early 2017, 2018, maybe. And I wanted to finally confront the idea of women, and I'm a woman myself, or identify as a woman. And so I thought, okay, this is it. Like, I have to do it. It's my time now. And so I started by thinking about like what a woman represents to me, and in my family, my mother and my aunts and my grandmothers are the fountain of life. They give food, they nurture, they love, they give so much. And at the same time, I told myself, well, mom always feels like she's spinning in circles, running around, working jobs, doing this, picking up the kids, cooking food, doing whatever, so much so that she's invisible. Her identity as a woman is gone. You know, it's removed. It's no longer there. All she becomes is a vehicle to move this family, to allow this family to continue thriving. And so, and this movement that she's constantly in is controlled by whiteness. It's controlled by capitalism in our society. And the economy. And so mom becomes this invisible person, but not at all, right? Because this mother, this woman could be anyone. It could be your mother. It could be anyone's mother, right? And they could be from any culture. It doesn't have to be Mexican necessarily. And so I became really drawn to the idea of painting something that is hyper like visible and is giving life, but also non-existing. And to me, it felt like really comforting to know that I was honoring my mother, but also honoring my trauma that I have, and allowing that to be in conflict with each other. This is another work where I use visibility and invisibility in a different way here, because I'm talking about the separation that happens between child and parent. And light plays a role in this one, in that when you put flash onto the painting, the parent absorbs all the light and in a sense protects the child. And to me, that's a reflection of what my parents have done in this for us in this country. As a recipient of DACA, I know and I pray that one day I will have legal status in this country. But we all know that parents, for the most part, take the blame for bringing us here, and they take the consequences for that. So in that way, light is being controlled to make the parent absorb all the consequences and all like the flash, the literal flashback that a society gives them. When light is then removed, we only see a child. And so the child glows in the dark and becomes a symbol of hope. And that to me is like a direct representation of who I am and who this country sees me. Sometimes I really fight with this idea that DACA recipients are seen as these superstars, that we have to save the world. We have to be doctors. We have to be lawyers. We have to go above and beyond because we have to be so grateful for being given this opportunity. But at the end of the day, it's really simple. We are just people. We can be hairstylists, we can be receptionists, we can be anything, and we don't have to be those superstars, but we have to be seen, right? And we have to be seen at the same level that you see yourself reflected in the mirror and the way that you see your neighbor. And so I love playing with this idea that light could like take and give you different versions of what's in front of you. All of these portraits are of my family and I, and it's also, they're so obscure that it's of nobody, right? And so in that same way where like I play with things that are visible and invisible, I'm talking to you about my family because that's where my heart is, but I'm also talking to you about the universality of these people just being people and not having any faces. They don't have a gender, they don't have a color, they can be anything. And I think that's like the most beautiful part of it, is that things don't have to be completely resolved, because as an artist, I'm just giving you an idea of what I'm thinking about. And I'm hoping that you bring your own understanding to it, and that you bring your own background and your own history, and that maybe you can look, oh, sorry, wrong way, that maybe you can look at these portraits of mothers and women and try to resolve your own trauma surrounding that. And so I think it's really beautiful to have two things that make sense, but also combat each other. Because I think that once we find pain, we can also see beauty. And when we have beauty, we have to see pain. My father once told me that, and this is the last thing I'll say about this, but my father once told me that in order to understand happiness, if you want to be the complete, like the happiest person in the world, you also have to understand real pain. Your level of and your gauge of pain and happiness has to be the same. You can't always live in like pure bliss, because it's never going to be as high as it should be if you truly understand pain. And so I see painting in the same way, in that I can give you something, but I also need you to understand the polar opposite so that I can give you the full experience.
Well, thank you so much because I had no idea that these were like so personal, like these images. So that really informs, and our understanding of these images, and that idea of like the binaries, of those oppositions that you are talking about. I find that really, really interesting, because at the same time, even though you play with the black and white, like the us, them, like that kind of opposition, you also have a lot of like grays, like many like hues of grays in your work. So it's a real complexity. It's not just like a binary, but I think it's just quite interesting. And so my next question is in this same line of opposites. And I wonder if you could talk a little bit about that really incredible series that you just showed, like just a little bit before, that is called In Times of Crisis. And in this series, that one, you record an essential but like silence and ignored and invisible, we could say, reality that followed that huge natural disaster in the Napa Valley, like due to the wildfires in 2017. So while, as I said before, the news focused on the spreading flames and how people were evacuated and from the valley, you went to the vineyards and to document the migrant labor. And not many people did that. Like we didn't hear about that from the CNN or New York Times or anywhere. So you were showing us how the workers had to stay picking up the grapes so the harvest wasn't lost. So could you tell us a little bit about your experience there and the paintings that came from it? And what is the message of this series? And do you consider that this kind of art is an activist art? Maybe there are many questions, but like I find that like really interesting, this painting in particular.
Thank you. Well, yeah, 2017 feels like so long ago, but I feel like every year I'm constantly reminded of that first year. because nothing has changed. And a lot has changed since then in terms of how agricultural workers are seen, because social media has been a great platform to be able to share these things. And I think now more than ever, people are waking up to see the reality of our country and the way that we treat labor, and especially agricultural labor. But in 2017, I remember my husband and I were living in Lafayette, and which is in the East Bay in California. And I went home to go make sure that my family was okay and to check in on my parents. And I remember seeing the valley as this like deserted place where people were just getting in their cars and leaving, and there was nothing there. There was no cell service. And so every year when the wildfires happen, the cell towers go down. There's no way of communicating with one another. And it becomes really surreal. It's apocalyptic in many ways. And I just remember friends that are wealthier saying like, oh, we're going up here, we're leaving, we're going to Utah, we're going wherever. We can't be in the smoke. We can't be inconvenienced with the smoke. The air quality is so bad. Air quality got so bad that it was worse than like a good day in China. And to me, I was like, wow, people actually get to leave, and it comes down to money. It comes down to wealth. If you have the wealth, you get to escape the smoke. But if you look out into the vineyards, you see all these people who are wearing these neon yellow and orange jackets, and they're very easy to spot. It's not like we're talking about something that you can't see, right? A lot of people label undocumented labor and undocumented people as invisible, which to me is hilarious and ridiculous, because we are not invisible. We're the most prominent people in our communities, right? And especially when we're talking about agricultural labor, because you're physically wearing something that is so visible, it's hyper visible. And so to look out into the vineyards and to see this sea of people like physically running up and down the vineyards, trying to save the grape, trying to make an effort to not lose the wealth that Napa Valley cultivates every harvest, because this was around harvest time, it was just like so devastating to me. I remember telling my husband, like, well, no, I have to go out. I have to photograph this. I have to talk to these people because it's so unfair. And then we look at the news, and then all the news is covering is, Silverado, whatever resort and all of these things, and the amount of money that we're losing in wine and whatever. And I thought, well, that's important, yes, but that's all replaceable. What about our lives? What about my community? What about my tios and primos and people those are real lives? And the question that nobody was asking was like, are they being protected? Do they have, at least masks? Now we know the importance of masks and how they can make a huge difference. But realistically, all that these winemakers cared about was making sure that the grape was harvested and that it wasn't tainted by the smoke, regardless of the cost of these lives. And when I was out there speaking to these people, I said, why are you out here? The smoke is harming you. There's going to be respiratory issues, which now we are seeing in the community. We see a lot of agricultural workers that have respiratory issues dating back to 2017. And it's only been stacking up ever since then. And so I asked, like, why are you here? You're risking your lives. And to them, they said, if I don't work this time, I don't get to feed my family in Mexico. I don't get to go back home. This is the amount of money that we make. This is the overtime that we need to be able to survive for the next year until I come back. And so that was a really surreal moment, because now we start to see the way that climate change is affecting migration patterns, right? We're starting to see how climate change is really affecting the life of these people. In a way that is surreal, in a way that we cannot be removed from it. I drink a glass of wine now, and I think to myself, like, this glass of wine cost somebody's lungs. And maybe that fed their children, but that's not okay. We should have a more sustainable way to provide labor, or to have a glass of wine that doesn't cost the life of my community. And I'm really proud of myself for being able to capture this in paintings. I decided to honor these moments in paintings because, like I said, painting is the language that I use with my father. And so it felt appropriate to use that same visual language with my community. And I think in many ways, these paintings don't only reveal the hardship of what happened during that time, but they honor the workers in a way that isn't oppressive at all. Because I think about that a lot, like in the work that I make, I never want to make anything that continues the oppression of my people. There's a lot of artists that decide to do otherwise, that paint people looking sad and with emotions that are a lot more intense and heavy. And while I think that might be appropriate in some instances, I think all that that does is continue to oppress us and to believe that we are less than others. And to me, that's not okay. These paintings are a celebration of a moment that we responded in an honorable way. We do that now with the wildfires in up and down California. Agricultural workers continue to harvest lettuce and grapes and all of the fruits and vegetables that are on your tables tonight. And that is something to be honored. You know, that labor is something that we should all look at and praise. And so I hope that these works praise those people in these moments instead of continue to oppress them. One really fun fact about this work, I worked really, really hard for about a year to be able to get darkness without using black. And so all of the colors that you see here, all of the darkness is created by layering blues and reds in an order that also replicates the color of wine. And so these works are very specific to Napa Valley in the sense that I try to replicate different colors of whether it be a Cab or a Merlot or something like that. And to still keep it in that language of art, you know, because I think it's important to note that we have not always existed in the language of art or in the visuals of art outside of being represented in an oppressive way. And so I like to think that I'm using color theory and then I'm touching on all these themes of historical ways of painting in a more contemporary way that brings up my community.
And I think it's really an interesting thing that you make it like so personal, because like you're painting like your community and it's really like individual works, but at the same time, you collaborate with many people in these paintings, no? Like even when you talk about like just the layers, like putting different layers, like to create something, like I just find it really interesting, like, and really connected to the way you work. So maybe that could be my next question that relates to your collaborations with other artists and amateurs, no, like art students or others that can help you like paint, for example, the murals, no, like if you could talk about like those ones in particular. And so let's see. So in your work, you have collaborated with many people, and an example of that is that a huge campaign that is called "Come to Your Census." Who counts in America? Yeah, that one. A collaborative work by you and artist Ana Teresa Fernandez, where you make use of this kind of like gear, no, like high visibility, as you say, like people are invisible, but that's kind of like, what are you talking about? If we're like extremely visible, no? So, and you printed like the words "somos visibles," we are not invisible. That is kind of interesting that they're not like a complete translation. So they're related, but they're like kind of different. One is in English, one is in Spanish. Maybe it would be great if you could talk a little bit about like why you choose to do it that way. And also the mural "Somos Visibles," where you had like many people putting their hands like on the wall and kind of like representing this anonymous but public audience. And you have also worked with students where they have contributed to your work. So can you tell us a little bit about like how is to collaborate with people, but at the same time to feel that a work is your work? So what is your experience as an artist collaborating with other people?
Yeah, I've had great collaborations. I've had awful collaborations. I've had collaborations that got started and never went anywhere. But collaboration is a very important word for me in my practice, because I believe that we are all connected. We are one. I think all of you, if you've been in an email with me, you know that's my signature. You are another me. And I strongly stand by that. Growing up with a father who refused to adopt like American culture. That's why I have all these tattoos and history of my country, because my father was very focused on letting us know where we come from and who we are. And one of those things is community, right? It's the idea of taking food out of your mouth to feed your neighbor, even if you don't like your neighbor. It's saying, I will stand by you and I will help you, even if it brings me down, because that's the beauty of life, is being able to share things. I was really lucky that I met Ana Teresa Fernandez and we were able to create these hoodies together. And it's funny because people ask me all the time, like, is this your project? Is this her project? And I said, it's our project. You know, these colors clearly came from my paintings because I was obsessed with these colors. I was obsessed with what neon yellow and neon orange represent. The idea that visibility can be a superpower used to protect you, but also to make you visible. I was so in love with that. But I wasn't seeing, like, it took Ana coming into my studio and saying, like, hey, pick up that piece of fabric, like put it on, you know, like put it on your body. And then she said to me, like, if you could say anything on your like hoodie, if I made you a hoodie, what would your hoodie say? And she said, I want to make it for you. And I said to her, we are not invisible. And at the time I was thinking a lot about headlines, the newspaper, the media, the way that we are constantly referred to in certain terms to keep that oppressive circle going, the way that like undocumented people are referred to as invisible, voiceless, living in the shadows, all of these terms that I think do not represent me or my family, but somehow circulate my mind. And in doing that, I believe it for myself. So I said, Ana, how about we take that word invisible and flip it and say, we are not invisible with these colors that are in my paintings. So I handed her a hoodie and we came up with the We Are Not Invisible hoodie. That to me is a confrontation of whiteness, right? So when I wear the English version of this hoodie, and I am in a white public audience, I'm telling people that are not like me that I am not invisible and that they will not make me invisible. But when I wear the Spanish version and I'm around people who, like myself, are either Latinx or of migrant descent or migrants themselves, I'm reminding you that we are visible. And so that's why the translation is not direct. One is we are not invisible, and the Spanish one is we are visible, because I don't need to tell my sister or my brother that we are not invisible. We know that, you know, we know that we are not invisible, but I do need to remind you of your power. And I do need to remind you that you are visible and that there is beauty in your experience and that we can share that with the world. This project, we were able to take all over the Bay Area. Ana Teresa Fernandez and I signed up the hundreds of people for the census in 2020. And if any of you know or are informed, and with the census, for every person that signs up, it's $20,000 to the community in that district. And so we were allocating money for children's schools and parks and public services that are severely underfunded otherwise. So by making ourselves invisible in the census, we are cutting resources to our community. And so to be able to take our hoodie and to like show people what it means to be visible and to tell them, hey, you're actually doing something right now that's going to make an impact for your children for the next 10 years or for your family for the next 10 years. That was super powerful. The mural that you're talking about, I decided to take inspiration from the t-shirts and the hoodies. And to put this up on Coombe Street in Napa Valley, which is my home. I don't live in this neighborhood, but this wall is actually the wall of like a little market, like a 7-Eleven type of market, quickie mart type deal, where the community stops in for a drink, they stop in for a snack. It's Latinx for the most part. And so you see all the tios with their Mexican music coming by and whatnot. And I thought to myself, like, what a beautiful way to, again, remind ourselves of our power. Not to say we are not invisible, because we know that, right? But to make a statement that says, hey, we are here and we're going to be so visible that you'll be able to see us anywhere up and down the street, right? So my friends came into town, we painted this mural together. I had never done a mural of this size ever before, and it's just words, but it's actually pretty hard. And then, but the magical piece here was inviting the community to leave a handprint. And I think if you all want to look at your hand, there's nobody else that has a hand like yours. It's so individual, right? Yours is either shaped different, you've got veins somewhere else, fingers are different sizes, everything is so unique. And to leave your handprint means that you existed and that you are there, that you, regardless of what the society or politics or anyone might say about you, you are there and you are visible and you contribute yourself, all of you, to this message. And so I had kids and adults and grandparents, my entire family was there, and everyone came to leave a handprint as an act of solidarity. And I think it's beautiful, as you say, Raquel, because it's so powerful to say that it's individual, but it's also so anonymous, right? Because there is no actual tie to that hand. You can't trace it back to anybody. I don't even remember where I left my hand, but we all become one, right? At the end of the day, it doesn't matter whose hand is who, because we are all in this together and one as a community.
And I think that's great when you talk about the community and like how that takes me a little bit like to the idea of your audience, because your audience is like so diverse. I mean, you're like painting people that we think are invisible, but they, of course, they don't consider themselves invisible. So you have like people like us, for example, or you have like the gallery, the art galleries where you show your work. So my question, I would like to zoom out a little bit and to hear about like the idea of your audience, because in your series you form a, like a narrative of visibility, invisibility, pride and shame, resilience, defeat, legality and illegality, representation and silences. So who are you trying to reach with your work, and who's your audience? Who's the audience of all these? I mean, you have like it's like extreme diversity, you know, in your work, you know, like from these to your paintings, for example. So who's your audience? Like, can you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, I think first and foremost, my audience is my direct community. Whenever I make work, I feel like I'm making work for the 6-year-old me that didn't know my place in society. I'm making work to remind myself as a child that I will be okay, that there are opportunities for me, that being poor and undocumented does not have to define where I go in life, and that it definitely isn't going to alter or halt my dreams in any way. And so I start with this image because these are children from the community Boys and Girls Club in Napa Valley. And my first audience, I think there's 2 audiences to the work that I make, but my most important audience to me is my family and my community. I want my work to be a reflection of our beauty, of who we are and where we come from. I've always wanted my family to be able to see themselves and to let go of that shame that I was talking about earlier, because that shame of being undocumented and not being okay with your identity is so crippling. It's like, I mean, I don't even know what to compare it to, because in reality, you're hiding every part of yourself. You're playing and living a double life by hiding your status, because you're constantly asking yourself how you're going to keep people out, you know, like literally build a wall to protect yourself. And so when I make work, I want the audience to see that we can let go of that wall, that wall is imaginary, that all those notions of being less than because of our status are nothing but threatening words, because somebody feels scared for other reasons beyond our ability to control them. My audience are people who don't think they have the ability to make art. My audience is like anyone and everyone who needs to be seen, who needs to be felt like they are more than just their labor or their country of origin or their skin color. That's who I like, ideally my audience is. It's being able to show the community that they have a voice, that they have something to say, that they have something to share with their neighbors, and that they're going to be accepted and embraced. Outside of that audience, I think my work also functions as a mode of education, you know, as a way to help people understand why we came to this country, or why we are the way we are, why we do things differently. I think, you know, a lot of people ask me questions, like really personal questions all the time, like, oh, I don't understand that, but now that you showed me this painting, it makes more sense, you know, why your family is so important, or like whatever it may be. And I think that art is a great form of education, because it allows us to see things from a perspective where it's open, you know, it's not like a textbook. It's not something that is forcing you to digest it, right? It's an entrance to my world, but you get to enter it from any perspective that you desire, or not, or you can just leave it. You can walk away and never think about my work ever again. But I also like to think of my work as seeds, right? Like planting seeds. So you might not agree with my t-shirt. You might say, you know, whatever, the visibility message, I don't agree with it. We might have a difference in politics, but you're never going to forget what my t-shirt looks like. and that's going to be planted in the back of your head. And so my work is a way to plant a seed to start a conversation. When Ana and I were doing the Somos Visibles project in San Francisco, we actually, we were not by any means only targeting people of color or, like Latinx communities. We were open to embracing anyone who was willing to have a conversation with us. And we had a lot of people that do not align with our politics that came up to us and said, hey, those are really cool t-shirts. Like, what are you guys about? And we said, we're out here trying to spread this message of visibility, showing the people why it's important to be visible, especially like underrepresented communities of color. And they said, oh, I really like that. And these were people that were wearing like very visible signs that they did not align with our politics. And we were like, you know what, if you align with our message today, like, why not? Let's share this, right? Like I said, it's about community. It's about understanding each other. It's not about saying you are different than me and there's no way to communicate. Like, if you don't come over here, I'm not embracing you. My work is about saying like, hey, you might be standing over there wearing something else than me and not knowing why I'm wearing this, but let's have a conversation. I will give you a t-shirt, I'll give you a piece of art, I'll give you whatever, and you take it home with it. You take it home with you and sit with it. And you get to decide for yourself if you are going to open your mind to the world or if you're going to remain in the ways that you want to. But as an artist, I think it's fulfilling to know that I can touch the kids, that I can have something to contribute to my family and my community, while also providing an educational opportunity for those that have not been in my experience.
And I think thank you. And I feel like the idea that we are, your audience now, and we are privileged because we're getting to know you and we're getting to know your work. So I think like having such a diverse audience, I think is really rich. And I just saw that you had in the next slide, like some like brushes. So maybe I would like to talk about that, like if we can, like to talk about the work as a production, not just as a product. And because you use in your work like all kinds of like found objects and textiles, and you even make your own pigments, no? And so I think you collect the pigments, no, from the ground, and you make your own paints. So why do you do that? And how does that a variety of materials you use inform your work to create a message? What do you decide to create your own pigments instead of just binding somewhere?
Yeah, well, it's a great question, and I'm glad you asked that. I hope you guys aren't annoyed about me talking about my dad. But like I said, my father is honestly, he is the root of everything. I think he is the reason why my family is so close. He's the reason why we are so lucky to be here. And he, I grew up in this beautiful, the exact same river. We were kids running around, splashing around. And every time, and dad would take us out there and he would always say, Arlene, come look at the color of the rocks. Arlene, come look at the texture of the trees. Or he'd be like, Arlene, look at how smooth the rocks are. And there were moments in my practice where I said, Dad, I don't know what color to use. And he'd say, go back out into nature, like go back to the river and take a moment for yourself and figure out, like, the nature will tell you what you need to do. The materials will talk to you. There's nothing, he said to me one time, there's no pattern, no color, no combination that has not been made by nature. You just have to find it and replicate it and know how to replicate it. And so as a child, I grew up looking at this and not just seeing a tree trunk that was rotting away, but seeing ways in which texture and color can exist together in this idea of like decay and life and history. And it just gets me so excited because I was a child, like running around in the water, but then dad being like, look at this rock, feel this rock, like this one changes when you put water on it. And so I see my practice in the same way, in the sense that whenever I want to make something, it mostly stems from wanting to understand my own trauma and then learning how nature has the tools for me to be able to create that. And so it's a collaboration with nature, right? It's a collaboration with the earth and saying, I want to talk about women. How do I do that? Do I need paint? What kind of paint do I need? Where does it come from? Does the material need to have a connection to the woman that I'm painting? And how can I be the vehicle that connects them all? And it's really beautiful because this is my father and my niece, and they're working on rocks together. They're smoothing them out. And so this image I just got the other day from my sister, and she said, like, look, dad's teaching Arlene how to do what you were doing as a child. And to me, it just like, it brought tears to my eyes because that was me when I was little. And now that gets to be my niece. And so this conversation about materiality and art and culture and trauma and all of it, it's all connected. It's all one, right? It's all, I feel really lucky, like being here with all of you, like to be able to share with you so much about my family and my personal life. I feel really lucky that I've had the father that I've had, because he's been so informative in every aspect of my life. He's made me the best artist that I can be. And I know that my niece will also be the best that she can be because she's growing up the exact same way that I am. Thinking in terms of materials, this is a fun story to tell. It'll be brief, but my husband, I hope all of you know, and if you're not informed about the legality surrounding DACA, I'm not allowed to leave the country. And so I'm allowed to work legally within the country and travel within the country, but I'm not allowed to leave. So I have not been home to Mexico in 25 years. This January, it'll be 25 years. And my husband, like a couple of years ago, ended up going up to Canada for a boys mountain biking trip. And I was in my studio in San Francisco, and I remember he drove up in our brand new truck, and this truck was not even registered. It had no paperwork, no legal paperwork, but it crossed the border. And so when my husband got to Canada, he sent a picture and he's like, oh, we made it. And he's so happy. And instead of being happy for him, I started crying and I went into a full panic mode, because it really broke my heart that a piece of metal like the truck that is constructed of all these materials had more freedom than I did, that I had to stay home. But that this truck that had no registration, no paperwork, had the freedom to travel. And it was literally magical. And I'm telling you that, like, I believe in the way that all of these things are connected, because at that time when I was crying and sobbing in my studio, I looked out the window, and I was at the dog patch in San Francisco, where that is very industrial. I saw a pallet on the floor. And I kept looking at it, and I was crying, and I thought that pallet would make a good art piece, but I don't know how. And so I like ran downstairs and picked up the pallet and brought it upstairs, and I was like carrying this heavy thing. They're super heavy. And then it just sat in my studio. And for a long time, I was thinking, like, how am I making this? Why am I so drawn to this palette? Like, what about it is bringing me in? And I slowly started to put things together, right? To think about the way that these vertical lines are reminiscent of like being a prisoner of something, right? Being a prisoner of an economy. Thinking about how the shipping pallets are literally what holds everything that is exported and imported into the country. And so just much like my truck, this shipping pallet moves. It has the freedom to travel, like to go from here to Europe, to Mexico, to wherever. It needs no registration. All it is a vehicle that like can move from one place to another, but it has more freedom than I do. And it is considered trash. It's made out of really cheap wood, right? And so I repurposed it, and I put an image of a worker on it, in an attempt to put an image of myself there, of who I believe that I am in my community. And in a way, by imprisoning this image in this palette, I'm also giving it freedom. And so again, we go back to this idea of duality, right? Like being one thing, but also being the polar opposite. And that's where materiality really plays a huge role in the work, that it's in everything that you see. It's never just like, oh, that object looks cool, let's, bring it in. There's always a story behind it. There's always a way that it connects to my family, or that it connects to me personally. And again, I was taught that by my father, who said, just listen to the earth, and the earth will tell you where to go. And that's why my work does not look the same in all of the series that I've shown you today. Everything is different, because I'm constantly looking and searching for ways to tell my story in the most honest and true form.
Well, thank you. And in fact, like I would like to continue like talking about these ones in particular. I find it like so like captivating, and because I think these are from your series, like Guilty Innocence, no? So it's kind of like that kind of duality, and how you show that here. So as a wrap up, because I think we're running out of time, I wonder if we could talk a little bit about the art creation in general, and for you in particular. So what is the mission of an artist? And when you show this kind of like paintings, the palette, like in an art gallery, like, do you explain that? Like, do you have like a caption explaining kind of like your message, or you're like hoping people can interpret them their own way, or like what is the context for that, for the audience, and your role as an artist there?
Yeah, I think my role as an artist is really interesting because, I love talking about why I made something or how it connects to me. But ultimately, I think there's more power in allowing the audience to decide for themselves what it is they're looking at or why it is important. I think the role of an artist, if I'm being completely transparent, is to look at something and to find the appropriate way to present it to society so that society can then take something and learn from it, right? It sounds a little egotistical to say that, but I think to say that like I have to teach you something, right? But there's nothing that I'm trying to teach that is not about my family or myself or my experience. I think if we learn, there's so much I want to learn from you, Raquel, and from everyone here, right? Like we all have different things to contribute to the world. And art for me is just one of the ways that I can provide you either an object or an experience to where we can get closer to one another. And I love hearing what people have to say. If any of you in the audience want to say anything about the work, I would love to hear how you connect to it, because a lot of the times I have ideas of what these colors or these textures mean to me, but ultimately you all probably have more. And it's in that dialogue that we're going to find beauty. It's in that conversation that we will have between each other and with one another that we can find the ways to connect, and we can say, oh, hey, wait, we are more alike than we think.
Yeah, I think you're like totally right. And I would like to thank you for such a fascinating conversation. And I think we're reaching out our time limit for the conversation, not for the questions. So I wonder if we could turn to the audience to see if there are any questions for you, because I do have a lot, but I would let the audience first ask. And if they're still being a little shy, maybe I would just like to start just with one question that is still kind of like in my mind and we haven't talked about. And it's kind of like, how do you choose the materials? Because sometimes you like sew things in, or sometimes you use like those objects that you find. Sometimes you use a palette, and sometimes like a canvas. And how do you choose? Like, do you know ahead of time, like the message that you want to transmit, and how do you know, like, how do you choose like the material in order to transmit that message?
Sometimes it's really hard to know what material to use. Sometimes I don't even know what to do. And it takes years, it's not like oh, I have a formula, I use painting for this, I use textiles for this, or sculpture or social practice for any of it. It takes me I think honestly, being an artist is a lot of like reflecting on yourself. It's like a lot of work of being alone and learning a lot about yourself and what hurts you or what makes you happy and what makes you feel. I do a lot of writing. I think my writing practice actually helps me figure out what materials I'm supposed to use, because it isn't what I suck at writing, and I'm not that great at communicating or explaining things. But sometimes I actually, I could show you all. I have this practice in my sketchbook where I write 5 words every day. I wonder if you could see that. So every day at the end, I write 5 words to summarize what my day is like. And sometimes it's like, sometimes it's colors. Sometimes like on this specific day, it was preparación, conversación, regular, tiempo, reconocer, esperar. And so I write words, and then eventually I'm like, oh, I can see the patterns of things that I'm thinking about. Like I'm either thinking about red, or I'm thinking about pink, or I'm thinking about like food or whatever it is, right? And I make those connections, and then eventually I can create something from that. And sometimes it's like, it's a learning process. Sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. Sometimes I rework it. With this series that you guys see behind me, which is the newest work that I will be exhibiting in a solo show in Wisconsin in a couple of weeks. I didn't get to this point until my niece was born. My niece is 2 years old, and you guys saw her in some pictures. But I had always known that I wanted to talk about family separation, because I was separated from my family when we came to this country, and it's something that has always sat with me in a really painful part of my heart. Even when I was a child, I knew I wanted to talk about that moment of separation, but I never knew, and I know I didn't have the tools to talk about it. Or to make work about it. I didn't know how to do it. And the day that the moment that my niece was born and she came into this world and I saw her, I felt like I knew. I was like, okay, I know, it's all right there. This little baby, this like 2-second-year-old baby just gave me the answer, because now I understand love. Now I understand sacrifice. Now I understand how you would give someone the world just because you love them, even if it means that you don't make it. And so then I started the series, and I was thinking about my family and their clothing and what it means to not use paint, but to use textiles that carry energies, that carry love, that carry pain, And so I took my parents' clothing and my siblings' clothing and I cut them all up and I made these fragments, these pieces, right? So like, again, like like what it takes to build a body, like how many body parts do we need, right? We need arms and a head and whatever. And I started putting my siblings together in pieces with their children, in a way that they would protect their children and then reveal their children and exist on all these different planes. And so this work I've been wanting to make my whole life, but it wasn't until my niece was born that I had clarity and that I could really sit with that and say, okay, now I understand love. Now, how do I understand materials and how do I bring that all together?
Mm-hmm. Can I just ask something? Yeah. Well, I would first like to thank you both. Thank you, Raquel, for your really brilliant questions. You showed you really knew Arlene's work really deeply. And so for your fascinating questions, which have prompted these fascinating answers and so enriching descriptions and explanations by Arlene. So thank you, Arlene, for opening your heart to us through your work and with your words today. So linking up with what you've just said, I have two questions regarding the process. You've mentioned how important your family is, not just to you, but to your work. And now you've been talking about colors, about the use of color. And by the way, I would like to congratulate you on those silhouettes, which I found so fascinating. Those I think they were even revolutionary, because they made me think of those very fashionable silhouettes in the 18th and the 19th centuries, which was so static and so proper. And you've made them dynamic and personal and full of life, and even using color in them. So I'd like to ask you, as regards to your family, do they like being featured in your paintings, and do they have a say as to how you represent them in your paintings? And as regards colors, do colors have a special meaning to you apart from their value as representation of nature? Does red have special connotations to you apart from the associations we may all make between red and fire or green and leaves? Do they conjure up any special connotations in you?
Yeah, color is such an
they do.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
My father is an incredible colorist. Like his job is to mix colors and textures, and so he can look at a color and create it and tell you exactly how to make it. He'll be like, it's 10% white, 10% this, or 5% this and this and this, and then you do it and it's the exact same color. It's beautiful. And so color is really important to me. Like everything is intentional. So when you see like behind me the two pinks and the blues and then this like paint splattered t-shirt, everything has a reason, right? For me personally, it doesn't mean that any of you or anyone in the audience will pick up on it. It's more like an ode to myself and to my family. Sometimes using certain colors is to like honor, and I do that with the textiles as well, right? Sometimes I very intentionally put logos in an angle where you can see it, or with my brother's work clothes, I make sure that like I honor the stage that he was at in his life, and that it has that label on it when it's, his son's next to him or whatever it may be. I'm fascinated by color. I love color. Like I said, in Tiempos de Crisis series, I created darkness using wine, the color of wine. And so everything that in regards to color is a process of understanding my relationship to it, how it plays a role in my life and in my community, and then being able to hopefully translate that properly. The other part of your question, my family, I think, is sick of being in my paintings, because I'm constantly saying, hey, can you take a picture like that? Hey, can you like hold the baby like this? Hey, can you move that way? And they're just like, oh, Arlene, yeah, like we're done. And I'm like, no, this is what we're showing people. A lot of the times I record them and they don't know that they're being recorded, because I use a lot of audio to study what I want to make. And they're just like, here comes Arlene with her with her photographs and her recordings, and I think they're used to it by now. But more than anything, I'm proud to make this work because I'm recording history for my family, and I'm hoping that my niece and my nephew and the future generations to come will remember the sacrifices that my parents did by bringing us to this country. And so this work then becomes a time capsule of how of all of our struggles and all of our pain, and hopefully we will never, or the future generations will not forget that, because I think the moment that we begin to forget our histories, we let go of a huge part of who we are. And so I'm going to keep pushing my family to be in this work so that the future can remember who we were, even if we are faceless and obscured in different ways.
There's a question by Diana Sorensen, and I like to tell you that it was Diana's idea to hold this event. She discovered a painting by you a few months ago, and she was so impressed that she immediately wrote to me and said, look, I've discovered this painter and she's fascinating. Why don't we try and arrange a meeting with her, a conversation with her? And here you are. So thank you, Diana, for this really brilliant idea which we've made possible.
And thank you and Raquel for taking the idea and running with it. Thank you, truly. And thank you, Arlene, for the pleasure of listening to your thoughts about how your work connects with your family and your community. And I will confess that in my family, even some who are documented and of long residence here, they run around with somos visibles and all over the place. And there's something wonderful about following the places that your work reaches. But I wanted to ask you about work you've done very recently that I also love and I've seen, and it has no color. And it's drawings of bags of waste, beautifully executed. I happen to have one, and I have it so that I see it first thing in the morning. But I wanted you to talk a little bit about that kind of work. There are lines, they remind me of Paul Klee and his series of angels, but these are not angels. These are bags of waste. So tell us a little bit about that part of your work that is less specific to your community, sadly, in the sense that waste is one of the universal headaches of our time.
Yeah, of course. Well, it was so nice to meet you, Diana, and thank you so much for head spearing this and having me here. It's an honor to share that with all of you. I'm trying to move this around so that you guys can maybe see a little bit of what Diana's talking about. I have a few of them on the wall. They're really hard to see because, like Diana said, they're single line drawings of trash. And I started these drawings in 2017 at the same time that I think it was right before I made En Tiempos de Crisis. It was in the beginning of 2017. I had just moved to New York City. I'm in Brooklyn right now, but I had just moved to New York City. And I was fascinated, like completely fascinated by the way that waste is just put on the sidewalk and not in a trash, like in a bin. In California, we have bins, and you take out the bin and then you put the trash in it. But here there's these like mountains of and pyramids of trash. And I was really young and probably drinking a little bit too much. And I ended up, like sitting in corners and just having a sketchbook. And one night I realized that the people who were forming these pyramids of trash looked like my father. They looked like my tios. They looked like me. They were laborers. They were kitchen staff. They were, the maintenance staff. It was all these people that took out the trash and just piled it up. And I was fascinated by thinking about consumption and how much we consume as a society, right? We go into a restaurant and we eat and fill up with everything that we can, not thinking about the waste that we are going to leave there and leave behind. And so really the trash drawings came from me thinking about the experience of being privileged and being white. You go into a restaurant, you eat, you consume, and then you pay and you leave. And then this person takes out the trash for you. And now you've created this bag full of all the leftovers of your joy or in consumption. And they sit there and then they accumulate one on top of another. But the last hand to touch that bag, the creator of that pyramid, and pyramids are important in my culture. And so I was just fascinated by like the different stacks and mountains of them. The last person to touch that is my father, essentially, right? It's a community member. It's someone that looks like myself. And they are also invisible in many ways, right? In the same way that you walk past the trash bag and you don't even think about it, you're just like, oh, it's going to leave. Someone's going to pick it up, but I don't have to be consumed by it anymore, right? The trash bag in a way is a reflection of me. It's a reflection of the way that people use agricultural workers, undocumented labor, and they take and extract everything from it and then leave the waste as if somebody is supposed to take care of it and it's no longer their problem. And so I see these trash drawings as self-portraits in many ways, and they start with one line and they end with the same line. And so I never pick up the pen. It's always one line, because life is one line. It's a continuation of one thing. The consumption, the beginning, the birth, it all starts with the line and it ends with the same line. We're seeing the repercussions of climate change. We're seeing what capitalism is doing to our planet, and it's all going to end at the same place that it begun. And that's why I'm still making those drawings. I'm fascinated by them. I think they're hard to explain to people. They're still about migration. The conversation is still about consumerism and climate change and the ways that we are seen as a community. It's just a really abstract medium that is harder to explain because it's not a portrait of someone. But I'm glad you have one, Diana, and I know your daughter has a few as well.
And Arlene, if I may offer a different point of view when I look at these drawings, I think that they are a portrait of a society that consumes too much and produces too much waste. And so I think it's not a self-portrait of those who collect it. It's a self-portrait of our declining culture of excess. So it's very sobering in that sense. Anyway, that's how I see it. Thank you.
There's a question by Victoria. I don't know if you want to read it, Raquel.
Yeah, of course. So Victoria is asking, and she says, as an immigrant myself and understanding what it is to be separated by your loved ones, do you think that your art is helping you over time to process the trauma of separation, not only to make it visible, but to process it? Also, do you think you or we will reach a point where that pain of separation disappears?
Wow, that's a great question. I'd like to think that it is helping me understand my pain behind separation. But realistically, it's probably not. I'm not there yet. I have not been able to work through it. I know that because my legal status is still not stable, and there is ever-changing regulation surrounding DACA, I still feel the exact same way I did when I was 3 years old. I still live in complete fear that I will be separated from my family. And there are moments where I tell myself, like, that seems irrational, like I make work about this. If this actually happened, we have resources. There are people who care about me. There are people who care about my work. But ultimately, I'm the one who's lived through it, and I know what it feels to be separated by borders, to have loved ones that pass and you never get to see them again. And moving forward, I have to have these very difficult conversations with my family, like what happens if someone leaves and we can't see them again, or what happens if someone's deported and we can't see them again. And so while I like to tell myself that I am working through it and I am healing through the work, I'm not there yet. And I'm trying to get there. I want to get there so badly. But I don't know that I'll ever be separated from that as well. Sorry, I don't know what that was, but yeah, I don't know that I can ever be separated from that trauma, because we hold trauma in every part of our body, right? And so I think even if, you know, magical fairy came down and gave me a green card tomorrow, I don't know that that's the answer. And I don't know that that would get rid of the pain and the suffering, because, and I like to think that it wouldn't, because I'm doing the work that I'm doing for my community. And at the end of the day, this is a larger battle that is beyond me, right? This is not about me getting a green card. It's not about me being stable or my family being stable. It's about our community, right? It's about being one. And I really stress that, you know, I really, really believe that. I believe that we are one, and it's not until we're all treated the same, and not only in this country, but worldwide, and immigrants in general, that I will be fulfilled in that way.
Mm-hmm. If there are no other questions, could I ask another question, Raquel?
Yeah, Tia has
or is there another question? Oh, sorry. Yeah, Tia, sorry. You go.
No, please, Tia.
Hi. Sorry, I'll be quick. Thank you so much for speaking with us today. This has been a real treat. Your work is so powerful and moving, and I've enjoyed learning about it through speaking with you. I was wondering, you talked at the beginning about how you had been asking yourself this question, who gets to tell my story? And I think that's really compelling. And you answered it as, I'm the only one who I want to tell my story, and I don't want anyone else to speak for me. And so I think as you have developed as an artist and sort of found ways to express yourself, you've also been telling the stories of other people. And so I was wondering if you have ever felt pressure around being the spokesperson for other people, and in finding ways to do sort of documentary work while maintaining your own style, and where the tension around that is.
Yeah, thank you, Thea, for that question. It's a great question, because there are a lot of problems surrounding identity politics in general. You know, I think this country and media, they love to have one spokesperson and say, like, you are the representation for like Mexican undocumented DACA recipients. Like, tell us about the 800,000 of you, you know? And that's very problematic, because you're right. I want to tell my story. I don't want to tell my neighbor's story, because they have a voice as well, and they should be given the opportunity to tell their story as well. You know, I know in my family, my sister and my brother, they would never speak up for themselves, and in that sense, I tell their story. I get to tell their story, and people get to learn about them and to know how amazing they are, because I'm the one who's willing to suffer the consequences for the backlash that comes with that. And so in a way, again, it's this duality, right? It's like I get to represent myself and my family, and in doing so also represent portions of my community that align with me and that align with my message and what I'm doing, all while trying not to step on anyone else, and also not become the tokenized, you know, Mexican identity marker, you know, because that's not what I want. Ultimately, if I ever do anything good with my work, I just want to give people the power to see that they can use their voice, that they can use their story, and that there's no shame behind it, right? And if that means that mine goes first and mine gets all the backlash, then I'll take it, because it means that I'm setting and paving the way for others to feel like they're worthy of visibility. Doing all of this work is extremely exhausting, and like emotionally, and for my relationship, for my family, I'm constantly moving. I'm constantly arguing with people, because again, being a representation of a minority is really hard. And there's a lot of people that try to take advantage of that. There's a lot of people that want the news front cover, that they want to be the one to say like, oh, I put out that story of this poor undocumented woman. And I have to tread lightly when doing so, because I want to be very intentional, as I am with all of my work, with the way that society is perceiving me, because I know that it's an entryway to my community.
There's
Thank
another
you.
question. There's another question.
Sophia has a question.
Hi, thank you again so much for being here. And I just found all your work to be incredibly moving and like nothing I've ever seen before. And I was curious just to hear a little more about your creative process. And I know you said writing is really important to you, but if there's specific environments or things you do on a daily basis or people you associate with that you feel kind of, trigger the creativity in you.
Yeah, thank you for your question, Sophia. It's a great question. And I think if there's any artists in the audience, we all have different habits. I know that for me, location is very important. I was in Napa Valley with my partner for a few years during grad school and through the process of COVID. And I was very uninspired. I was feeling, even though I am doing a lot of community work and I was working with Anna on the Census Project, as soon as that died down, I felt like I was stuck in this routine, and it was not, it wasn't what I needed. And so understand, like, no, and that's what I mean. Like, you have to know yourself as an artist really well to know when you are sinking and when you are losing parts of your creativity, and you have to know how to find them. And so for me, New York is one of them. I came to New York and I was like, no, this is it. Like, I have to be here because the trash bags are here and because my friends are here. Art is here. I get to see a new show every day. I get to hang out with artists from all over the world. I get to be as culturally diverse as I can within the boundaries of my DACA status. And so I moved to New York and I picked up and said, this is what I need to do for myself, for my practice. And I'm putting that first. And like I said, being in this position and talking about this work creates a lot of conflict in my personal life. I'm still learning to manage that, but on a daily basis, I make sure that I exercise, because a clear head to me is the best in terms of being able to work. I'm constantly surrounded by artists. In my neighborhood, all my friends live here and they're all artists as well. And so it's important to me that I'm having people come into the studio and looking at things and giving me feedback and saying, Arlene, how about this material? How about that? Like that experience I had with Ana Teresa, where she was like, let's make that into a hoodie. The community is really what makes art, and knowing and finding that community is really important. And I feel really lucky that I found it here in New York. I will tell you all great news. I'm moving back to California next month, which is kind of ironic, but talking about community, I was just given the Headlands Fellowship. When Headlands is an art center in San Francisco, right outside of Marin on the Golden Gate Bridge. And so I was given this really nice award, and I'm going to go back home and continue doing more research about fire ecology and migration. So I'm really excited. I also am just open to where the world takes me. I was in New York for 3 months and now I'm getting back to California. But art is always around me, and it'll continue to surround me, and New York will be here. So yeah.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. There's one question in the chat.
In the chat, I just saw that. Yeah, thank you, Marta. So Correa Patrick was saying, like, first of all, she wanted to congratulate you for unveiling your truths to us and being so vulnerable. I am a teacher and feel inspired to use your work to allow my students who are experiencing similar realities a mode of expression. How has your art felt liberating for you and perhaps for others?
That's a great question. And I think that, not only my art, but using art as a way to talk about our hardships is really beautiful, and it's really cathartic, and it can bring us a lot of inner peace. For me, the most liberating work that I've done is the Somos Visibles, We Are Not Invisible hoodies, because for the first time I was wearing my status on my body, and not only telling people that I was undocumented, but embracing its power and erasing all of the notions that people had of me for being undocumented. And I can't even explain to you, all of you, how it was literally taking off weight off my body. This weight that I had carried around with me since I was in kindergarten and being scared to share with my friends that I couldn't travel or have a license or all these things, I was able to remove that by putting on this cape, right? By putting on this hoodie. And I know that it did the same for my family. And so I can't speak for other community members because I think we all have a different experience. But I know that when my siblings wear their hoodies, they no longer feel invisible, and they are proud to post on their Instagrams or to share with their friends and say, I'm undocumented, I'm a recipient of DACA. And I know that I did that for my siblings. And I think that's like my most proud moment in life, is being able to create that liberation for my siblings, because otherwise we would all be stuck in it. And so I highly encourage you to create some sort of art lecture for your kids or our students, because it is really life-changing to use art as a mode of liberation.
Yeah, and I just wanted, waiting if someone else has a question, but I wanted to thank you for doing art with this kind of content, because you are talking all the time about visibility and invisibility, and maybe visual culture is something that we used to see, we see that everywhere, but we don't really pay attention. And once you pay attention to specific work, you find so much information there, so many stories within each of your works, no? And we studied that in my class. You have here a few of my students, and it was interesting that you can look at your work kind of really fast, and you're like, oh, this work is about this. But when you look at each piece individually, you can be talking for an hour about or more, about each piece. So it's really interesting, the idea of we are so used to seeing visual culture. We're used to so used to seeing images, but we don't really know how to read them, and we don't really know how to understand them. So I just wanted to say thank you for allowing us to have that.
Could I just ask a last question, Arlene? You mentioned the feedback you get in New York by all these people the artists surrounding you, this very exciting environment, and how location is important to you. And I was wondering, that was the question I wanted to ask. Do you feel a difference between the feedback you get from your exhibitions from the people in the different coasts, on the East Coast and the West Coast? Do you get different reactions to your painting because your paintings, your work is so full of social, has such a strong social component, a personal component? So do you think people react differently on the different coasts of the US?
Yeah, they indeed do act very differently. In San Francisco, in the Bay Area, I've had people deny my work and say that I'm lying, and that what happened in 2017 never happened, and that they would, and specifically winemakers, say that they would never expose their workers to any of the conditions like that. And so I've had people very clearly say that I'm lying, and I'm like, no, I'm not. I've made artwork for this reason, because we are continually erased out of history. And our experiences are covered up and erased. And so that was my entire purpose with that series, is making documenting the truth, right, in our reality. In the Bay Area, I was not embraced really until this year. It took me winning an Emmy and doing all this work, and for the Bay Area to be okay, we finally accept Arlene, or we'll acknowledge Arlene. And it really has taken, it's been really hard for me, because I grew up in Napa Valley and I love the Bay Area, but like I said, it was really hard being there, just because I felt like I was constantly hitting a wall, trying to get people to see my work and to validate my work. Whereas in New York, it's been easier. I mean, the culture is different surrounding art. And I think right now people are really aware and want to be more attuned to identity politics and to understanding communities of color. And so coming to New York, I tell the stories, I show the work, and people are like, wow, we've never seen this. We didn't even know that this was happening. How can we embrace it? How can we support it? How can we be a part of it? And so it's very different. Oh, sorry. Sorry, it's very different, but I think both are so important.
Okay, so there's just one last question. We're over time, but I think we can allow this very last question by Yali, if you agree, Arlene. Yeah.
Yeah, of course.
Okay, good. Yali, go ahead.
Thank you so much. So I'm
Oh, we can't hear you.
I mean, can you hear me?
A little bit. You're breaking off.
Yeah. Mm.
Should I type it?
Yeah, can you type it in the chat?
Type it. Mm. Mm-hmm.
Okay. Or can you hear me better like this?
Oh yeah, that works.
Yes. Okay.
Okay, so I wanted to ask a little about the health care, or if workers during the 2017 fire had access to like healthcare, or what were their conditions? Because I'm from Mexico City, and I know that back there the health system is really bad, and I wanted to know, like, is there a difference between like accessing healthcare in Mexico legally or accessing healthcare in the US?
That's a great question, Yali. Agricultural workers in Napa are basically given one clinic, a local clinic in Napa. It's called Clinic Olé. And this clinic takes community, like it basically takes the agriculture, like Mexican Latinx community in Napa, and gives them access to healthcare at a reasonable price. And so it doesn't matter if you're undocumented, a seasonal worker, or a permanent resident of Napa, you have access to healthcare. It's very limited, but it's actually the same healthcare that my family and I have had for 25 years. And it's really good. It's also ironically paid for by the Napa Valley Vintners. So it's kind of this vicious cycle. And I study all of this because I'm really interested in the economy of Napa and how it functions. And so the Napa Valley Vintners are essentially just a group of all the winemakers and wineries in Napa. They come together and donate millions of dollars to go into Clinic Olé. And then the clinic distributes access to health in various ways, whether it be COVID vaccines or, basic healthcare or routine checkups or anything like that. A lot of the times I know that people hit dead ends because they might get a diagnosis, but then they don't have access to the what will resolve their issue, whether it's medical or mental or whatever, right? So you could go in and say, oh, I have problems breathing. And then they'll tell you, oh, you have lung cancer or it's whatever. And then it's a dead end because you got the diagnosis through Clinic Olé, but now you don't have the resources to treat it. And so the cycle is really vicious. I'm sure it's better than it is in Mexico City. But it's something, it's not the best thing. I've had a lot of issues with Clinic Olé personally because they wanted to take my work and put it up in their clinic without compensating me, which was ironic. And they were like, oh, we want your work to be in the center that people see themselves reflected in, but we don't want to pay you. And so again, it's like all of these like really hard issues surrounding like identity. And I refuse to work with them simply because if it was a different artist and of a different background, I'm sure they would have compensated them or had a different conversation. And so I deal with all of these, complexities of like, how do I use my identity and my story and my community while also honoring that, whether it's with money or with contracts or whatever it may be. It's all very complex, but I'm glad to at least be able to share that with all of you and to document it and make artwork out of it.
So thank you. So I think we can leave it here. I don't know, Raquel, whether you would like to add something and to.
If you do that, then we will be talking for like
Okay.
hours. So maybe
Okay.
maybe I think that was like a great ending for the conversation.
Yeah. So thank you so much. Thank you both so much. It's really rewarding even and profound listening to you, Arlene. I think it's so profound and so just so marvelous to listen to the positive side that you've got and to find how you can find the as you said, the beauty in harshness, how you can find and show the honorable side of labor. I really congratulate you for being so positive, not forgetting the pain, which makes everything much more profound. So thank you so much. I think you've taught us many, many things. And well, at least I have lots of things to think about now after listening to you. So thank you very much. Thank you, everybody. I would also like to thank the organizers of Harvard's Worldwide Week. I know one of the organizers, Bailey Thaxton, has been with us today. Thank you, Bailey, for inviting us to participate in this very special program once more. I hope you've liked our contribution. I think it's been a really special contribution to this special week in Harvard. And thank you again, Raquel, for your brilliant questions. And thank you again, Arlene, for accepting and making this very this very special event possible. Thank you so much.
Thank you all.